In this video we're going to be replacing these old thermostats with some nice new Nest Learning Thermostats on our dual zone S-Plan Plus heating system. Let's get to it. We're going to start with unboxing these, have a quick look at what's inside. So here's the Nest thermostat itself. I've gone for the black ring brushed metal. It looks very nice. Okay. We've got a set of instructions, installation guide, talking us through all the wiring, warranty. This is the Heatlink. The Heatlink is actually what does all the switching. It powers the thermostat. The two connect wirelessly to each other. Here is the back plate for the thermostat. The thermostat will sit on that when it's on the wall. And then there's just some screws in here. These screws I think are designed so that they can go straight into plasterboard without needing wall plugs. Okay, so before we start, I'm just going to give you a quick tour of the current setup before I change anything. We can see we've got the fused spur for the central heating system. We have a Potterton programmer. We'll find the model number when we take it off the wall. And our valent boiler. Downstairs, Potterton thermostat. Upstairs thermostat. It's also a Potterton. In the upstairs cupboard, we can see we've got our wiring centre here. We have two zone valves for upstairs and downstairs central heating. We have our zone valve for the hot water tank. We have our thermostat for the hot water tank. We have our main pump. We have our switch for the immersion heater, which is down here. In fact, be really careful with that because it's on a different circuit. When we isolate this circuit, that will still be live. The first thing we want to do is to turn off the fuse spur. That should safely isolate the entire circuit. And what I do recommend, especially if there are other people in the property, or as it is the case here, it's quite close to the worktop, I could very easily accidentally turn that switch back on with an elbow when I'm operating on the programmer here. So what I do recommend is that you just pop the fuse out for safety as well. So I'm just going to pop that fuse, and it's a good opportunity to check the wattage on the fuse at the same time. Okay, so let's take a look at the Potterton programmer. Your programmer will come off the wall in one of a few different ways. You might have a screw to loosen. In the case of this one, there's a little latch in the bottom right corner. So if you get a flathead screwdriver, stick it in there, wiggle it around a little bit, it should come loose, and then you'll hinge it upwards and off it comes. In the back of the programmer, we've got a wiring diagram showing us the neutral live. Live comes off and switches between terminals 1 and 3 for hot water, and terminal 5 switches between pins 2 and 4 for central heating. In the actual unit itself, pin 5 has been wired to the permanent live so that pin 5 and the permanent live are both permanent lives, and they switch for central heating and hot water. You'll also see we've got some additional terminals labelled A, B, C and D, which are not in the wiring diagram. These are for general purpose use. This particular Potterton programmer, which is model number EP2002, probably manufactured in 2002, is kind of doubling up as a wiring centre in its own right. And so we've got a general purpose set of terminals and a couple of them are being used, in my case C and D. In your case it could be different. You might not even have any of them in use. I think what these will be is, one will be connecting between the wiring center upstairs and the boiler, and one will be connecting between the boiler and the pump. So when we take this off, we're going to need to maintain all the connections between all these different things. We're not going to need the programmer. What I'm going to do is take it off and replace it with a blanking plate that, you know, will hide all these wires in the wall. Okay, so we've got our programmer off. You can see I've used these Vargo connectors to connect together the wires in just the same way that they were when they were in the programmer. So we've got our earth block here, we've got our neutrals, we've got our lives, we've got our pump live and boiler signal. I don't yet know which one's which. And then these were for the central heating and the hot water. I've just terminated these individually. We're not going to need these wires because the Nest Heatlinks will be responsible for switching those signals, and those Heatlinks are going to be installed upstairs rather than here. Okay, I've come upstairs back in the closet to have a quick look and see what we've got in our wiring center. Let's pop the cover. Okay, so right away I can see we've got some problems. First of all, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 terminals in our terminal block. When you think about it, we're going to need to power T1 and T2 for 2 more thermostats. So we're going to need 4 more connections at least here. There's a little bit of space. I could hide some Vargos in, perhaps, and do it that way. I can also see that I'm not sure if the case was really designed for cables coming out. It's got cables coming in from the back. They'll be from the thermostats and the boiler and the programmer. And then we've got obviously these cables here that go off to our zone valves and our thermostats and our pump. But these cables, there's no cable restraints on these. In fact, this one, I can see, you know, it's been desheathed below the level of the wiring center. And we're going to need to get more wires, more cables in to here so that we can wire in our Heatlinks. So what I think I might do is change this for a slightly bigger wiring center. We'll have a bit more space to work with. It'll have cable restraints to make this a little bit safer. Because right now these cables, there's nothing holding these in apart from the copper in the terminals. I could peg them to the wall, but I think a new wiring center, get a bit more space, is going to make life a lot easier. Okay, so I've picked up this Drayton LWC1 wiring center, and I'm going to do a quick unboxing and see what they give us. Looks like we need to unscrew it to get in. Okay, so they've given us some instructions, different kinds of wiring schematic. We're going to have to deviate from these instructions a little bit because this is going to be an S-plan plus, because we have two zones for central heating. They've given us some labels to label up our wires. We've got some extra live wire there, screws, cable restraints, some extra jump pieces here. We've got a permanent live, a neutral block, and a dedicated earth block. They've preloaded jump wires between these terminals, and I can see in the back of the lid you've got maybe a couple of different wiring options here, so twin zone or S-plan and biflow or Y-plan systems. If you've got a simple Y-plan or S-plan system, you could follow this and I think you'll do just fine. We're going to have to deviate from this just a little bit because we have an S-plan plus system, a dual zone heating system. So where they're talking about room stat, we've got two room stats. We have three valves to deal with. We've got heating upstairs, heating downstairs, and hot water. I can see there is a spare terminal here, and yeah, they haven't put any wires in. So we have a spare terminal here that we could use for that. In the programmer section, we have the programmer signaling heating on and hot water on. This will be where we connect the Nest Heatlinks. And again, we're going to have two heatings on signals, one for upstairs, one for downstairs, and hot water, so we're going to have to deviate from this here. We have the switched live to signal to the boiler to start heating. We have the switched live coming from the boiler to the pump to tell the pump to run. And we have our cylinder stat, call for heat, and common. Now, one thing I have noticed with this is they've preloaded a jump wire between terminals 12 and 13. Terminals 12 and 13 are the boiler and the pump. Now, we don't want that jump wire in our system. The reason why is that we have a pump overrun feature, which means it's actually the responsibility of the boiler to switch live to the pump. Right now, we have terminal 6 has a jump wire over to terminal 12, which is the boiler. So when the valves open, they will switch live from the grey wires over to the orange wires. Orange wire to the boiler will activate the boiler. The boiler will switch live to the pump. The pump will start. When the thermostats detect that the rooms are up to temperature, they will disengage the valves. The valves will close and disengage live to the orange, which will disengage live to the boiler. The boiler will continue to switch live to the pump for another 5 or 10 minutes. That's the pump overrun feature. And what that's doing is to just continue to distribute heat away from the boiler and just improves the longevity of the boiler and protects it. You might wonder where that water's going if the valves are closed, and it's actually going through an overflow valve. Here's our overflow valve. So when the zone valves are closed, but the pump is still running, water can continue to circulate around the system. So I'm just having a look to see if the new wiring center is going to fit where the old one was. They put the old one very close to a pipe, and the hole where the wires come in is about that far away. But it looks like the new wiring center, the knockouts are in a good place. We've got some clearance for the pipe, so I think we're going to be successful with this. So a wiring center might look like a scary mass of wires when you first look at it, but it's actually quite straightforward once you start to analyze it and figure out how it works. There's a few things that we can identify straight away. We've got our earth in terminal 1, the yellow and green wires. We've got blue wires and some blacks coming in on terminal 2. Those will be the neutrals. Terminal 3, we have a single brown wire coming in that's connected to several grey wires. Those grey wires go off to the zone valves. So we know that's probably going to be our permanent live coming in. The grey wires are usually connected to permanent live. When the zone valves close, they're going to switch that live over to the orange. Those orange wires all connected together are also connected to this grey wire, and that's going to be going back to the boiler to signal to the boiler that it's ready to heat. Terminal 4, we've got 3 brown wires all connected together. One of those brown wires would have been from the programmer. The other 2 will go off to the room thermostats. Now we've got 4 grey wires coming in here. We already know what this one does because it's connected to the oranges. I can see this first one is connected to the cylinder stat, so that one's going to be a hot water signal from the programmer. This one is connected to a brown wire of a zone valve, so that's going to be one of the room thermostats upstairs or downstairs. Then that means this must be the other room thermostat. It's also connected to a brown wire upstairs or downstairs. If I wiggle the wire for the upstairs zone valve, yeah, it's this one. So this is the upstairs thermostat, this is the downstairs thermostat. Now with Nest, we aren't going to need these grey wires because it's not the thermostats that do the switching, it's the Heatlink. So what we're going to do is we're just going to terminate these grey wires in here safely. They're not going to be used. We'll have the neutrals and the lives for the thermostats. We're going to repurpose those to T1 and T2 on the Heatlinks. In the next terminal, I can see we've got, this is probably off to the pump. That was going to be our pump live signal. And then this last one is connecting between the cylinder stat and the hot water zone valve. Now the cylinder stat has a blue wire here. It's actually a switched live. It's not a neutral wire. So when we rewire this, I'm going to sheathe that in some brown wire sheathing so that it tells us that's actually a switched live. It's not a neutral really. It shouldn't be connected with the other blues. So I'm going to start by just disconnecting the wires from here and connecting them in to the new Drayton wiring center. We'll start with the ones going into the box, and then we'll get the box off the wall. We'll put the new Drayton on, and then we can figure out the wires that are coming out of the wall. So we're at the halfway point now. I've wired together all of the devices into the new Drayton wiring center, and I've temporarily moved the cables that are coming out of the wall into these Vargo connectors. That's just so that I can take this off the wall without losing track of which cables are which. So I've just taken the old wiring center off the wall. It actually does look like it was designed for the ingress and egress of cables around the side, but you can see they've really had to hack the plastic. It's really thick plastic on this box. I think I would have really struggled to have added new holes for new cabling while that was actually on the wall. It may have been possible, but I think it would have been really difficult. So if I'm taking it off the wall anyway to put holes in, I might as well just be adding a new wiring center, a new and improved wiring center with more space and cable restraints. So we're almost done with this part now. We've got our new wiring center mounted on the wall. Most of the wires are in. I've crimped any of the wires that were stranded. Any of the solid core wires, I've just put them in. You don't need to crimp them. We're left with 3 brown wires, 3 black wires, and 3 grey wires. Now 2 of these brown wires will be going to the thermostats upstairs and downstairs. 2 of the black wires will be going to the thermostats upstairs and downstairs. And we're going to repurpose these as T1 and T2. We just need to work out which pair of brown and blacks go to the upstairs thermostat, which pair of brown and blacks go to the downstairs thermostat. To do that, we're going to go have a look at the thermostats. So here we are at the upstairs thermostat. We need to take the faceplate off. Now yours might have a screw underneath, or a screw behind the dial, or there might be a latch to push underneath. In this case, you just pop it off from the top and the dial falls off. On the back of the faceplate there's a wiring diagram showing neutral, neutral, live, call for heat, and satisfied. That's neutral, neutral, so there's our neutral, live, and then here's our switch live for the call for heat. Now we're not going to use the switch live, we're going to blank that out and stash that in the wall. We're going to use the brown wire as T1 and the black wire as T2. To work out back at the wiring centre which brown and black correspond to the upstairs thermostat, we're going to connect them together and do a continuity test. So we're just going to run continuity between pairs of brown and black wires until we hear a beep from the multimeter. Aha. There we go. So we know these two correspond to the upstairs thermostat. We're going to repeat the same with the downstairs thermostat to work out which two correspond with the downstairs. Okay, so I've repeated that for the downstairs thermostat, and what I've done is to wire together the black and brown for the downstairs thermostat in this Vargo connector, and I've got it pointing downwards, and the black and brown for the upstairs thermostat, got it pointing upwards. The remaining brown wire was the switched live from the programmer. Since there is no longer a programmer, that's no longer needed, so I've got that grouped together with these other unneeded wires, the three grey wires. Two of the greys were switched live from the thermostat, and one of the greys was the hot water from the old programmer, which obviously is also not needed. The remaining black wire is neutral back down to the fused spur, so that's been wired into the neutral block. All that remains now is to install the Nest Heatlinks and get those hooked into the relevant places. Okay, so what are we going to need to do this installation? Obviously we have the Heatlink. I've picked up some 5-core flex cable, 5-core meaning it's got 5 individual wires in there, as well as some 2-core flex cable as well. My plan is to use the 2-core on the T1, T2 terminals, the low voltage terminals, and the 5-core to provide live neutral earth, as well as the switch live for central heating and hot water. Only one of the Nest Heatlinks will be wired up to provide the hot water. Only one of them will be in charge of that, but they'll both be wired up to switch the central heating. We've also got cable strippers, as well as ferrules and a ferrule crimp. The reason I'm going to use ferrules is because these are stranded cables and we don't want no strands going all over the place. I've got my wiring done for the 2 Heatlinks now. In both cases I'm using a 2-core flex for terminals T1 and T2 and a 5-core flex for the rest. The Heatlink for upstairs has its black and grey wires between terminals 3 and 6 for central heating and hot water, whereas the Heatlink for downstairs is just using the central heating. The grey wire is unused, so I've just snipped that and folded it back on itself for safety. You'll see as well I've labelled them upstairs and downstairs, and I've also labelled the corresponding thermostat as well. The reason for that is that they're paired, each thermostat, with the Heatlink at manufacturing, so it's important not to mix them up. During the process I managed to break my automatic wire strippers. They just don't work now. These were Stanley Fatmax ones. I'm going to have to order a new pair of those. In the meantime, looks like we're doing the rest of the wire stripping the old-fashioned way with a pair of side cutters. I have my Heatlinks mounted to the wall now and they're mostly wired up. Earth neutral live, I have those wired in. I've connected the T1s and the T2s to the brown and black wires using these Vargo connectors, and I've just pushed them down and out of the way. I've labelled up this block of unused wires and what they used to be used for, just for future reference. All that remains now are these 3 wires. We've got the 2 black wires, which are for upstairs and downstairs central heating, and this grey wire, which is for the hot water. The hot water is controlled by the upstairs Heatlink, so in my case, this grey wire needs to go into terminal 10, which leads through to the cylinder stat. The black wires need to connect to terminals 4 and 5, which are the brown wires for the corresponding zone valves. Now I'm going to install the mounting plate for the Nest thermostat where the old thermostats used to be. So what I'm going to do is just blank off this grey wire with one of these terminals and then post it into the wall, and then we'll be able to use our brown and black wires as T1 and T2 on the mounting plate. As you can see, I've got some making good to do with the holes left behind. The old thermostats mounting plate used these big drywall anchors that leave a big mess in the walls when you take them out. It's fine, we're going to redecorate this room anyway, so I'm not too concerned by that. Who needs paint when you've got plaster? So this is now dry. It could just benefit from a light sand before we come to decorate. We're actually going to wallpaper over this part of the wall anyway, so you won't see any of this. So for now what I'm going to do is to mount our Nest thermostats mounting plate to the wall. I discovered that in the box they provide this wall plate to cover up the mess, and that could be an option as well. I don't think this wall plate actually looks very nice, so I do prefer this approach of just mounting it directly to the wall. So what I'm going to do is stick a screw straight in. Just be careful when you're putting screws into the wall that there's no other cables behind the cavity here, and there actually are some on the left for a light switch that's further down the wall here, so we'll just be mindful of that. I think they're far enough back that we're going to manage to avoid these things, but just something to be aware of. That's now dried, and I've given it a light sand just to get a smooth finish for when we wallpaper. Around the hole it's very thin plasterboard, where the previous wall plugs have just blown out the back of the plasterboard. So I'm going to have to try and find a strong piece of plasterboard I can screw into, and it's probably easier said than done actually. So I think we're going to try it here. They give you a little bubble level that you can use to get it nice and straight, although there's a bit of latitude in the screw holes anyway. Just if you were slightly off, you can wiggle it around, and it's probably easiest just to get the first one in, not worry about that, and then line it up for the second one. Any final adjustments? Okay. And then we've got our brown wire, needs to go into T1. Our black wire, which was T2. It says in the instructions, it doesn't matter which way around you get them. It seems we know which one is which. Yeah, and that's that. Same thing with the downstairs thermostat. I've given this a light sand. There was a bit of a rough spot over here. I've had to work a bit harder there. They've done a nicer job posting the wires through here, not such a big hole. And this feels like probably it's dot and dab, so might actually have to drill the holes and put a couple of wall plugs in. go. Brown wire going to go into T1. Black wire into T2. I'm not going to put the thermostats on these yet. After I put the power on, I'll do a voltage check across these terminals just to make sure we've got 12 volts DC coming through here. If I'd made a mistake in the wiring center and we've actually got 240 volts AC coming through, it would blow up the thermostat if it was attached. Before I can put the power on, I need to close up where the old programmer used to be, and there's a few covers to put on in the cupboard upstairs. Back where the programmer used to be, we need to tuck all this neatly into the back box and blank it off with a blanking plate. I've labelled up the unused wires for the pump live and central heating, at least that's what they used to be. Now, because that's a metal back box and a metal blanking plate, we're going to need to earth the two of them. So what I'm going to do is change this 3-way Vargo connector for the earths for a 5-way and add a wire to the back box and a wire to the blanking plate, and then close it all off. It helps when you get the right length of screw. The power's back on, so I'm going to test across these terminals now using my multimeter. I'm going to start by just making sure that we don't have any AC voltage coming through. I've set my multimeter to a suitable range, which in my case is 750. And let's test. Nothing, that's good. Now I'll switch it to DC at a suitable range, which in my case is 20. We'll test that too. 11.9, close enough. We're expecting 12 volts across these terminals. I can see the Heatlinks have powered up. They've got these flashing LEDs. I imagine that means they're looking to connect to the thermostats, which aren't on the wall yet. But what we can do is to push the test button. You can see that the upstairs Heatlink has activated the upstairs zone valve. It should have also activated hot water zone valve. I think I can feel that. Pumps come on, and downstairs, it's activated the downstairs zone valve. If I turn the cylinder stat down, it should close the zone valve. Click. Yeah, zone valve's going. Don't know if you can hear that. Turn it back up. Zone valve's reopening. The radiators should be getting warm now. Yes, I can feel them getting warm from the bottom. Good stuff. Ready to try attaching the thermostat now. We're at the upstairs one. Got my correctly labelled up thermostat. The instructions say it should just clip into place. See a blinking light. Oh, it's powered on. Now we just have to go through the setup. Choose where the thermostat's located. This one's in the bedroom. Equipment. Now I have to set what kind of heating system we have. This is the upstairs thermostat. I've got it wired to the central heating and the hot water. I'm going to set this to system boiler, which is actually what we have here. Just been through the app setup procedure, nice and painless. And downstairs. Okay. For the downstairs thermostat, I'm also going to choose system boiler. But I'm going to tell it we don't need to control the hot water. Not connected. Well, there you go. Our new thermostats are installed. We've had them for about a week now, and they've done a really good job at learning a schedule that works for us, the different temperatures that we like to have through the course of the day. Hopefully, I've given you the confidence to try this in your own homes and shown that you don't need to pay for a pro installation or to be an electrician. I'm not. Let me know how it goes in the comments below, and if you've enjoyed this video, just smash that like button. It's like right there. Go on, do it.